I am Vernon Aldgate, 64 years old, and the day I finally locked my own son out of my bank account was the day I got my life back. It started quietly, the way most betrayals do. My wife passed from a stroke 18 months before any of this happened. 41 years we were married. I was a licensed electrician for most of those years, ran my own small crew, knew how to read a circuit diagram the way most men read a newspaper. When she died, I did not know how to cook a single meal that was not scrambled eggs or reheated soup from a can. My son called me the evening of the funeral. He said, "Dad, you should not be rattling around that house alone." He said he and his wife had the spare bedroom. He said they wanted to take care of me. I believed him. That is the part I have had to sit with every single day since. I moved in 2 weeks after the burial. My son had been between jobs for nearly a year by then, something about the company restructuring, something that never quite resolved into a clear explanation when I pressed for details. His wife ran a small online boutique selling handmade candles and seasonal wreaths. She did not run it particularly hard. The morning I arrived with 3 boxes and my late wife's quilt folded across the passenger seat, my son was standing in the driveway in expensive new sneakers I had never seen before. He helped me carry my boxes inside, and then over dinner that first night, he brought up the idea gently, the way you bring up something you have already decided. He said managing bills while grieving was a lot for one person. He said he could handle my direct deposits, just to take the load off. He said it like he was offering to carry my groceries. My pension from the electrical union came in at $4,900 a month. I handed him my debit card the following Tuesday. I thought I was accepting help from my own child. For almost 14 months I lived in that spare bedroom and asked for nothing except what I needed. I had I had my books. I went to the grocery store once a week. What I did not have was access to my own money. Every time I asked my son for cash, he would hand me $40 or $60 with a slightly pained expression, like the act itself was costing him something. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself he was carrying the household on his back. I told myself a lot of things that were not true. The moment that cracked everything open was not dramatic. I needed a new pair of work boots to wear on a weekend job I had agreed to help a neighbor with. Nothing fancy. Basic steel-toed boots, the kind I had worn for 40 years. I asked my son for $120. He told me he had already spent that week's budget and that I should wait until next week. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed next to my wife's quilt and thought about a number. I had been in that house for just over a year, $4,900 a month, times 14 months. That was $68,000 that had moved through my account since I handed over that card. I could not tell you what I had received in return. A bedroom, some scrambled eggs, $60 at a time. I did not say anything to my son that evening. I was an electrician for 38 years. The one thing you learn in that trade is that you never touch a live wire without first understanding exactly what is connected to it on the other end. I needed to know the full circuit before I made my move. The following Monday, while my son was out and his wife was occupied upstairs with her candles, I drove to my bank branch downtown. I walked in and asked the young woman at the desk to pull up a complete 12-month statement on my account. She printed it and set it on the counter between us. I have been steady in difficult moments my whole working life. Electrical panels do not care if your hands are shaking. I made them stop shaking a long time ago. But sitting in that bank branch, reading through those pages, I felt something happen in my chest that I had not felt since the morning of my wife's funeral. It was not grief this time. It was something colder and much quieter. My son had been spending my money the way a man spends money when he believes it will never run out. There were charges at a steakhouse 40 minutes from the house, $50 to $90 at a time. On nights he had told me he was working late. There was a hotel reservation in Nashville from the previous October, a long weekend I had not been informed about, $460. There were charges at a home furnishing store for nearly $3,000. Around the same month, his wife had redecorated their living room. My bedroom had not been touched since I arrived. There were subscriptions, memberships, delivery services, all of it running quietly in the background, month after month, on my money. I folded the statements into my jacket pocket and thanked the teller. I drove home. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table and thought the way I used to think when I had a complicated job to wire and not enough time to make mistakes. I was not going to make any mistakes. I spent the next 3 days doing what I had learned to do over a long career. I documented everything before touching the first wire. I went back to the bank and requested full statements going back to the month I moved in. I cross-referenced the charges against a small journal I had kept. Nothing formal, just notes I had written to myself about where my son told me he had been on certain days. The discrepancies were not subtle. The man had not even bothered to be creative about it. On the fourth day, I drove downtown to a different branch of my bank, one my son had never been to. I spoke with the branch manager directly. I explained that I had been the victim of unauthorized spending on my account and that I needed to close the account entirely and open a new one under different credentials. I told them the debit card associated with the old account needed to be immediately deactivated. The branch manager asked me if I was sure. I told her I had the paperwork to show her. She looked at the statements for about 3 minutes and did not ask again. I drove home with a new account number, a new card in my breast pocket, and the old account permanently closed. My next pension deposit would land somewhere my son could not touch. I parked in the driveway and walked into the house and sat back down at the kitchen table with my coffee. I had been home for about 40 minutes when my son's car pulled in hard. The front door opened without a knock, which of course it did. It was his house. And he walked into the kitchen with his phone in one hand and a look on his face that told me the old card had already been declined somewhere. He was at the kitchen counter before he spoke. He said the card had been rejected at the gas station and there must be something wrong with the account. He said it like a man who expects the problem to be corrected before he finishes the sentence. I told him the account was closed. He stared at me. He said, "What did I just say?" I told him again. I said I closed the account this morning and opened a new one. I told him the new card was mine and I would be managing my own money going forward. He put his phone down on the counter very slowly, the way a person does when they are deciding what register to take the next thing they say. He sat down across from me and he switched to a gentler voice, the voice he used when he wanted something. He told me he understood I was still grieving, that grief did strange things to people, that he was worried about me making financial decisions alone when I was not in a stable place emotionally. I let him talk. He said he had been to protect me. He said the money had been going toward household expenses that I benefited from, food, utilities, maintenance. He said I was not being fair to him after everything he had done to keep me comfortable during the hardest year of my life. I reached into my jacket and set the folded bank statements on the table between us. He did not touch them. He looked at them the way a man looks at something he already knows the contents of. I told him I had the 12-month record. I told him I had cross-referenced the charges against dates and times he had told me he was working or occupied elsewhere. I told him I had identified approximately $42,000 in personal spending that had no relation to any household expense I could account for. I told him I was not angry. I said that mostly because it was true. I was past angry. I was somewhere on the other side of it, in a place that felt more like clarity than anything else. He tried 3 more approaches over the next 10 minutes. He said the statements were missing context. He said some of those purchases were gifts for me that I had forgotten. He said he was going to have a hard time paying the mortgage next month without my contribution, as he called it, and that if things got difficult, he was not sure he could continue offering me a place to stay. I told him I appreciated the honesty about the housing situation, and that it made my next decision much simpler. I told him I had already called my neighbor 2 streets over, a man I had known for 20 years, who had a rental room above his garage that he had been trying to fill for months. I told him I had arranged to move in at the end of the week. He went quiet. Real quiet, not the calculating quiet from before. The kind of quiet that happens when a person realizes the leverage they thought they had is already gone. His wife came downstairs about then. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen and looked between us. She had that particular expression that people wear when they have been listening from the stairs for a while. She said something about how we needed to talk this through as a family. She said she was sure it was a misunderstanding. I asked her which specific charge on page 4 of the October statement was the misunderstanding. The Nashville hotel that slept 2 and cost $460. On the weekend she had told me she was visiting her sister in Knoxville. She went very still. I told them both I did not need anything else from either of them. I told them I would be gone by Friday, and I had no intention of filing a police report as long as the situation ended cleanly. I said that part clearly, and I said it once. My son tried one more time. He lowered his voice and said, "Dad, you cannot do this." He said after everything they had sacrificed to have me there, the least I could do was talk it through before making any drastic decisions. I thought about my wife's quilt folded on the bed upstairs. I thought about the boots I could not buy. I thought about $42,000 and $60 at a time. I told him I was done talking. I packed on Wednesday. It did not take long. I had arrived with 3 boxes, and I left with 4, the extra one holding my wife's quilt and the framed photograph from our anniversary trip to the Oregon coast in 2009. I did not say goodbye to my son's wife. My son's sitting in the living room when I made my last trip to the car. He did not get up. He did not speak. I did not look back at him when I walked out the front door. The room above my neighbor's garage was small and smelled faintly of cedar and old paint. There was a window that faced east. I slept better that first night than I had in 14 months. I gave myself 2 weeks to settle before I decided what came next. I did not do anything impulsive. Impulsive is how people get hurt in electrical work. You measure twice, you verify the load, you make sure the ground is solid before you touch anything else. At the end of those 2 weeks, I drove to a law office near downtown and sat across from a woman who handled civil financial disputes. I had the statements, the journal notes, and a clear timeline. She looked at everything for about 20 minutes and then looked at me over her reading glasses and said I had a civil case and possibly a criminal referral, depending on whether I wanted to pursue it that far. I asked her what pursuing it that far would look like. She said it would mean a formal complaint to the district attorney's office on the grounds of financial elder abuse. She said given the dollar amount and the duration, a DA would likely take it seriously. She said my son and his wife would be formally investigated, their own financial records subpoenaed, and if the spending aligned with what my statements showed, they would be looking at real legal consequences. I told her to file it. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It was not satisfaction and it was not grief. It was something closer to exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion you feel when you have been holding something heavy for a very long time and you have finally set it down. It does not feel like winning, it just feels like the weight being gone. The investigation took 4 months. My son called me twice during that period. The first call he was calm and told me he hoped we could resolve things privately before they got out of hand. I did not respond to that. The second call he was less calm. He said I was destroying the family. He said his mother, my late wife, would be devastated to see what I was doing to her son. I listened to him say that. Then I ended the call. The DA's office contacted me in late spring. They had reviewed the records. Between the direct unauthorized spending on my account and a separate discovery I had not even known about, specifically that my son had used my name as a reference on a personal loan application 14 months prior without my knowledge, they were filing charges of financial elder abuse and identity fraud. My son and his wife hired a private attorney. The attorney sent my lawyer a letter suggesting we consider mediation and a private repayment arrangement in order to avoid the disruption of a trial. My attorney asked me how I wanted to respond. I told her to write back with 2 words, no thank you. It went to court in the fall. I sat in the gallery on a Tuesday morning in the same dark jacket I wore to my wife's funeral. My son sat at the defense table looking thinner than I remembered. His wife was not there. I learned later she had filed for divorce the previous month, around the time the loan application fraud came to light. The proceeding was not dramatic. Evidence was presented. Bank records were shown. The loan application with my forged reference was entered into the record. My son's attorney argued that it was all a family financial arrangement that had been miscommunicated, that there was no criminal intent, that I had been a willing participant who had simply changed his mind. The judge asked my son directly whether he had my explicit consent to use my name on the loan application. My son looked at the table. The judge did not ask again. He received 18 months of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and a civil judgment requiring full repayment of the documented amount over a structured period. He did not go to prison, which I had mixed feelings about, but the attorney told me the judgment was a strong outcome for a first offense civil-criminal hybrid case, and that the financial restitution order would follow him for years. I walked out of that courthouse into a cold November afternoon and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. A street was normal around me. People walked by with coffee cups and earbuds in. A city bus went past. Nothing marked the moment as significant except that it was. I have been in the room above my neighbor's garage for almost 2 years now. I pay my own rent from my own account. I bought the boots I needed within the first week of moving. Basic steel-toed, the kind I have worn my whole working life. I still take the occasional weekend job helping neighbors with small electrical problems, mostly out of habit, and because it keeps my hands busy. My son and I have not spoken since the verdict. I do not know if that will change. I am not waiting around to find out. What I know is this: a 64-year-old man who spent 4 decades learning a skilled trade, who paid into a union pension for 38 years, who buried his wife and then trusted his son, is not someone who disappears quietly when he discovers he has been used. I was raised to do the work right the first time, to understand the full system before touching a single wire, to make sure the ground is solid. The ground is solid now. It is mine. And I am not moving off it again for anyone who has not earned the right to stand on it with me. If you know someone who has been treated as a resource instead of a parent, share this. And if you believe that basic dignity should not have to be reclaimed from your own family, hit the like button and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. You are not alone in this.